Today we are going to talk about the endocrine system, which is a system of hormone-secreting glands. A gland is an organ that secretes specific chemicals. One that you might be familiar with is the gland on a cat's head. You probably are all familiar with cats rubbing up against your leg or your face, and basically what they are doing is marking you as their territory. In this case, this dog is becoming this cat's territory. When you have glands inside of yourself, they can be secreting hormones. And hormones are chemicals produced within the body that regulate cells or organs. Here in this cartoon, you see a large, angry rat behind a scientist. The scientist holds a syringe and takes notes in his lab notebook. His notes say, 3:45 p.m., ignoring its squeals of protest, I have injected the lab rat with the growth hormone drug, implying that because of the growth hormone that he's injected, the rat has grown to this enormous size, and of course the rat can soon take revenge for being poked with a needle. There are two types of hormones: amino acid hormones that are soluble in water, and steroid hormones that are soluble in fat. I will add 2 other YouTube videos to the blog post on this topic so that you can watch those and see the 2 different ways that they have of interacting with the cell. The amino acid hormones, being soluble in water, cannot pass the membrane, whereas the steroid hormones pass through the membrane and into the nucleus. There are many glands in our body. Someone made the effort of making this adorable cartoon of all the different types of glands. Here are where the glands are located in the body. They are located from the base of the brain down through the torso and down to the genitalia. The first gland we are going to talk about, which might be of particular importance to you guys as high school students who might often feel tired, is the pineal gland, which regulates the sleep-wake cycle. Here we have a woman joking with her husband. No wonder you have insomnia, lying there all awake all night, which is basically just confusing cause and effect, of course. Some of you may feel sad when it is rainy or cold outside, and you may know people who feel very depressed during the winter, although in LA this is probably not as common. This is known as seasonal affectiveness disorder, and it makes people who, especially those who live in colder places, be very sad in the winter, and this may be a function of the pineal gland. The hypothalamus is just below the pineal gland, as you can see in this diagram of the brain, and is a very important part of the body that you should know about. It regulates homeostasis. You might remember that we talked about homeostasis a long time ago, and one component of it is temperature. Another component that we talked a lot about is with ocean fish. When you eat them, they don't taste as salty as the ocean water around them. Basically, homeostasis is your ability to maintain an environment inside of your body that is different from the environment outside of it. The hypothalamus performs a very important role in regulating the endocrine system and being the feedback system for all of those glands. You're probably familiar with this device. It's a thermostat, of course, and when you get cold, you can turn on your heater. When it gets to the temperature that you had asked it to get to, the system turns off, and your endocrine system functions similarly. If you find that you have a whole lot of a certain type of hormones circulating in your body, the hypothalamus will act to turn off the systems that produce that hormone. The hypothalamus actually produces hormones directly. Here we can see this cartoon. It says, "Never date a biologist." And the boy says to the girl, "Ever since I laid eyes on you, I've been head over heels. Are you as deeply in love as I am?" And she says, "You've caused me to produce a large quantity of oxytocin." Oxytocin is known as the love hormone or the trust hormone, and it's thought that it might be a useful tool in treating certain types of disorders in which people have trouble getting close to other human beings, like in autism. But it is additionally important in a lot of different types of social behaviors. It's been studied a lot in voles, which are little furry rodent-like creatures, and in them, oxytocin, as well as a similar hormone, vasopressin, is thought to be important in monogamy and pair bonding, and it may play a role similar to this in humans. Some scientists did a study where they put a whole bunch of men into a room with some sexy ladies. Half the men were single, and half the men were in a relationship, and they had the women walk towards the men, and waited until the men would step back. You might know this as your personal bubble. Most people do not want a stranger to get that close to them. Most people in this study wanted a distance of about 20 centimeters. Then they injected the men with oxytocin. When injected with oxytocin, the men who were single still wanted about 20 centimeters between themselves and the strange but sexy lady. However, the men who were in a relationship actually wanted a larger distance after being injected with oxytocin. So if you ladies have any problem with your boyfriend having a wandering eye, one solution would be to inject them with oxytocin if you can get your hands on any of it. The hypothalamus plays a very important role in regulating all of the other components of the endocrine system. One example of that would be cortisol, in which the hypothalamus releases the corticotropin-releasing hormone, which then goes and communicates with the pituitary, another gland we'll talk about later, which releases adrenocorticotropin hormone, which then goes and stimulates the adrenal glands, which we'll also talk about later, to release cortisol. Cortisol is produced under stress. It's basically like a long-term response to stress, and it causes sugar generation from non-carbohydrate sources. You might remember that on the first day I came in, I talked about a friend of mine who studies birds, and you saw both of these pictures before. There she is in the Bahamas holding two little birds, and there she is in the lab, doing lab work on the birds. What she's doing with the lab work is she's testing the birds for cortisol to see how stressed they are in relation to their habitat use and their mating success. You might be wondering why there's a picture of a woman's waist below. That's not my friend's waist, but we have a special term we use when we see a woman like that, who is otherwise skinny, but who has a little bit of chunk at that particular location. She would be called a muffin top. And a muffin top is associated with large amounts of cortisol. When they tested women who were overall skinny, but either had or did not have a muffin top, the women with muffin tops had higher levels of the stress hormone. The pituitary, like we just mentioned, is part of the relay system for the hypothalamus, and it is important in growth. It's considered a master gland. If you've ever seen The Lord of the Rings, you could consider it the one ring that binds them all, because it controls so many of the other glands. For example, the adrenal gland. Someone who has too much of the human growth hormone released by the pituitary can have gigantism. This is a disease in which a person grows to an enormous height, but it can be damaging because the person often doesn't have the structural support from their bones to support the weight they attain. When I was a little kid, they actually offered me human growth hormone, but I